to do, but go ahead. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. All right, I'm going to go through something real quick. I promise I'm not trying to be controversial, okay? But I want us to think about something, because I've been thinking about this quite a bit lately, all right? When did Jesus die and resurrect? What is the traditional Christian church view of when Jesus died and resurrected days?
Easter.
What?
Friday.
They died on Friday and resurrected on Sunday. Okay. There's one big problem with that, and that is Matthew 12:40, what Jesus says himself. Okay?
3 days.
If we're going to take Jesus at his word in Matthew 12:40, for as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the huge fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. If we're going to take that seriously, that Jesus was being completely, real literal with what he was saying here, then it can't be Friday to Sunday. It doesn't make any sense. You cannot. There's no way to get. You can kind of get 3 days out of it. You cannot get 3 nights out of it. Absolutely not. And I know the argument of, well, part of a day was counted as a day. No, it doesn't work for me. It doesn't work for me at all. It doesn't work for me at all. Okay? So I'm going to run through this real quick. I'm going to try not to confuse you. I don't mean to be confusing or controversial, but I want us to think about this. And by the way, does this really matter at the end of all things? No, it doesn't. Okay? I want us to put that out there too. At the end of all things, if we disagree on this, fine with me. All right. What if Tuesday after sunset is when they had the Passover meal? Okay? So after sunset, but remember, when did the Jewish day start? It starts at sunset.
Yeah.
Okay? When the sun goes down, the new day has started. Okay? So our Sunday, if by Jewish standards, started last night when the sun went down. Okay? So they count their days different than we do. So Tuesday after sunset is actually Wednesday. Okay? But I'm going to use our days to kind of make it make sense. So if that's when they had the Passover meal, and then he went out and was arrested, and went through his trials all that night. Okay? Then it would have been Wednesday after sunrise when they take him to Pilate, correct? They take him to Pilate, and that is when he is finally crucified, and his death and his burial. And what did they want to get him buried before? A Sabbath. A Sabbath. Or you can say the Sabbath. But here's the thing. There are multiple Sabbaths. Okay? There was the weekly Sabbath, and then there were other Sabbaths. The high Sabbath, which was the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which we just read about, it was the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, that was a Sabbath as well. Okay? So it could be that that's the Sabbath that they were trying to get him buried before. Was the Sabbath, which is the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. That would be Wednesday after sunset. Okay, so that's Nisan 14 and 15. That's the month that they were in. Okay? Then Friday, then Jesus is buried. Then Friday after sunrise is when the women have to go purchase and prepare the spices for Jesus' body. They could not have done that before then, because they could not have purchased them during the Sabbath. The first chance they would have had would have been Friday morning. Now, Friday began at night, but you don't go purchase in that day and time. You didn't go out and buy things in the middle of the night, right? So it'd be Friday morning that they would go and purchase and prepare the spices. And we're specifically told that when the Sabbath was over, they bought some spices so that they might go and anoint Jesus' body. But we're also told in Luke that they had to wait until the Sabbath was over to go do that. So there's 2 Sabbaths. I mean, it seems pretty obvious. There's 2 Sabbaths here that we're talking about. So Friday after sunset is now the weekly Sabbath. Okay, the end of the last day of the week. All right, that's Nisan 17. And then Saturday after sunset would be the first day of the week, and that's when the resurrection happened. Okay? That would be Nisan 18. And then, of course, Sunday after sunrise is when the women go and find him in the empty tomb. All right. So if that's correct, then Wednesday night, which was actually, Wednesday night, which was actually Thursday, would have been, by Jewish standards, that would have been the first night. Thursday would have been the first day and the second night. Friday would have been the second day and the third night. And Saturday would be the third day. We get 3 days and 3 nights. And we don't have to try and do this partial, well, maybe one day counted. There were 2 Sabbaths. There was the high Sabbath of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and then there was the weekly Sabbath. There were 2 Sabbaths. If that's correct, Jesus died on Wednesday night, not on Friday. Now, again, if we disagree on that, does it really matter? No. I'm just putting it out there because to me that's what Scripture says, actually. And this isn't earth-shattering for me. I don't base anything on the night Jesus died or anything, but for some churches this would be a big deal because they have Good Friday and they have all kinds of things that is based on. Some people take this and then they try to say Jesus was resurrected on Saturday, the Sabbath, and that's why that needs to be the holy day. And I think that's wrong. I think it's very clear he was resurrected on the first day of the week, after the sunset. And again, that's 3 days and 3 nights. Anyway, I don't want to argue about that or anything, so hopefully no one else does. But it is interesting. And it does then make Jesus' literal words literal. I mean, it completely fixes that. All right. We get the Passover in chapter 22. I think we're very familiar with these passages. Just notice here that we now have the lamb feasting on the lamb. Right? We have the Lamb of God, the Lamb who's here to save the world, eating lamb at the Passover feast. Very incredibly symbolic that this is his last meal on earth before he dies. He has another meal in Luke towards the end. But very symbolic here. Now notice there are multiple cups. If you ever have anyone read this during communion, I've had this happen once. We ended up doing the cup first and then the bread. In verse 17, it says, after taking the cup, he gave thanks. He said, take this and divide it among you, for I tell you, I will not drink it again from the fruit of the vine until the kingdom comes. And then in verse 19, he takes the bread, gave thanks and broke it, and gave it to them, saying, this is my body given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. So he did cup first, then bread. But then he does another cup in verse 20. In the same way, after the supper, he took the cup, saying, this cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you. But the hand of him who is going to betray me is with mine on the table. So, why multiple cups? Anybody know? It was just part of the Passover feast to have multiple cups. There were multiple cups where this was already part of the Passover. This idea of lifting a cup, of saying a prayer to God, of giving thanks. This was already part of the Passover. Okay? So when Jesus does this in the middle of it, right, he's not exactly doing something brand new, but he is rebranding something now. This is now a different kind of meal. Right? This is now not about the Passover lamb that we killed and ate. This is now about the Lamb of God. And about his body that's going to be broken and his blood that's going to be shed. Right? So it switches the symbolism to something new is what he does. But I had this happen once. We were on a mission trip, and the guy leading the communion did the cup first and then the bread because he read out of Luke. And afterwards, this is terrible. One of the older men in the congregation got up and chastised him tremendously and told us, don't worry, God still loves us and he'll forgive us because it was an honest mistake. And I was just mortified. I thought, wow. I mean, it's that way in Luke. I mean, did he really do something so wrong here? It was terrible. Anyway, that's that attitude of things have to be right. So Jesus describes his example. Let's look at verse 24 and following what Jesus says here. He doesn't have the big washing of the feet and other things that we've seen in some of the other Gospels, but he does say some things here that I want to highlight. So starting verse 25, Jesus is now talking to his apostles. He says, the kings of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who exercise authority over them call themselves benefactors. But you are not to be like that. Instead, the greatest among you should be like the youngest, and the one who rules like the one who serves. For who is greater, the one who is at the table or the one who serves? Is it not the one who is at the table? But I am among you as one who serves. You are those who have stood by me in my trials, and I confer on you a kingdom, just as my Father conferred one on me, so that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom and sit on thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. So how does Jesus here describe his example that he has set for them and how he wants them to lead? As a servant. How has Jesus served up to this point? What have we seen?
Wash feet. Wash the feet.
Okay, not in Luke, but yes. He's washed their feet. What else? How have they seen Jesus serve?
Fed people. Fed people.
He's fed people. He's healed people. Right? Did he come asking everyone to worship him? We've seen him come in and say, hey, stop taking the first seats at the table, right? Did he go in and take the first seat at the table? Did he have every right to do that? Absolutely. All right? He has served with a humble attitude. We've seen that over and over again in the Gospels, right? Not just the physical things he does for people, but just the attitude that he has, right? The only people that he has been harsh towards are the religious leaders of the day. Those who have come to him in need, he has helped them. So Jesus describes his example. He says, I'm the one who serves, even though he could be the one at the head of the table. And then do you think Jesus is being generous in his description of the apostles here? How does he describe them? What does he say about them? Verse 28.
You've been faithful to them.
Okay.
He stood by him
Hmm?
in all his trials.
Yeah, you've been with me through my trials. What are we talking about? What trials have they been with him through?
Well, anytime the Sadducees or the Pharisees
Uh-huh.
gave question to him, they were there too.
Okay.
And so they were with the crowd too, because they were looking at them
Sure.
also. Because they were following Jesus and talking to people.
Yeah.
And they had gone out on their own, at least once, maybe a couple of times, but they'd gone out and healed people and
Okay.
produced his word. So there was trials there in that, I would think.
Sure. So Jesus has been put upon. He has been questioned. He's been argued with. He hasn't been, and they have tried, at least in his hometown, tried to kill him once. But he hasn't really seen the persecution that he's about to see. Right? And I just think it's interesting here that Jesus says, you've been with me through my trials, because what's going to happen the second he gets arrested? They all flee. Right? I think it's interesting that he says this here. You've been with me through my trials, and I'm now going to give you this kingdom that God has given me. But the second he's arrested, they're gone. Now, that's harsh. I don't mean to be harsh on them. Right? They do come back, and they are faithful. And every one of them, except John, goes to a martyr's death, as far as we know. Right? So this is not how they stayed. I wonder if Jesus isn't almost predicting a future more than he's talking about a past. Sometimes you can set someone up, can't you? Through the vision you give them. And I almost wonder if that's not what Jesus is doing here more than, because then he talks about this kingdom that they're going to get. Right? I wonder if more he's talking about the future than he is the past. Norman?
Was it one of the prophecies from Isaiah talking about the shepherd would be
Struck and the sheep will scatter?
scattered? Yes. That's a prediction of that same thing, right?
Sure. Absolutely. To me, this seems more like Jesus is telling them about their future. Because again, has he been through some trials? Sure. But nothing compared to what he's about to go through. And they are not there for him in that. In fact, Peter denies him. Right? They do, again, they come back to him and they are faithful to him and go on to be incredibly faithful. But I just almost wonder if that's more of that. I still remember one of my dear sisters when I was preaching outside of Abilene during my graduate work. She kept hearing me mention probably a few times how clumsy Rachel was when she was little. And she finally came to me and said, you need to stop saying that, because she's going to pick up on that and she's going to think she's clumsy because she hears you say it so much. And I was like, well, she is kind of clumsy. She goes, well, she's not always going to be clumsy. Stop. Right? And she's like, you're setting her up. You got to talk about her the way you want to see her, not the way she is. And I was like, wow, great parenting advice. All right, let's talk about the swords. So, Jesus mentions to Peter that that Satan has asked to sift him like wheat. That's verse 31. But I have prayed for you. And once you have turned back, strengthen your brothers. Kind of this indication that Peter's going to be the leader of the group, as he has been all along. Of course, Peter replies, but I'm ready to go to prison with you and to death, which he's not at all. And then verse 34, Jesus answered, I tell you, Peter, before the rooster crows today, you'll deny me 3 times and that you know me. And then Jesus asked them, and here's one, pay attention to what he says here. When I sent you without purse, bag, or sandals, did you lack anything? Nothing, they answered. Okay? So he said to them, but now if you have a purse, take it, and also a bag. And if you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy one. It is written, he was numbered with the transgressors. And I tell you that this must be fulfilled in me. Yes, what is written about me is reaching its fulfillment. Remember, one of the predictions that Jesus had early in Luke was that all that has been said is going to be fulfilled. Okay? This is one of those moments. Was Jesus advocating violence here? Do you think? Some people use this verse that way. Some people say, see, Christians can arm themselves. I'm not arguing they can or can't. I'm just saying that ain't what this verse is about at all. This is not about whether Christians can arm themselves. Okay? That's not, this verse doesn't do that. Okay? So what is Jesus doing? Well, first of all, what does he remind them about? What part of their journey does he remind them of?
They were always taken care of. They had everything they needed.
Yeah, absolutely. And specifically when what? When
Jesus was with them. When Jesus was with them.
Okay, when Jesus was with them. But when he sent them out, right? When he sent them out 2 by 2, he told them, don't take anything with you, right? What was the point of that? He'll provide. I have an ear infection, so y'all are going to have to speak up a little bit, brothers and sisters. I love you. I need y'all to speak up a little bit. I'm struggling hearing y'all this morning. Yeah, he wanted to do just like God wanted to do with the Israelites in the desert, right? In the wilderness. Trust me. So don't take anything with you. I need you to learn to trust me. This is why Jesus does this with the disciples. Okay? So he reminds them of that moment. Remember I told you, I sent you out with nothing, and were you okay? Did you have everything you need? Absolutely we did. Okay, good to go. Now, go get a bag and get a sword. So why does he ask them, why does he tell them to bring swords? Did he want them to use them?
No, I don't think.
Oh, if they needed them, I guess.
He's probably speaking figuratively. Like
Okay.
The sword of the Spirit. The sword.
Well, but they do bring swords. They literally bring 2 swords. So this has to do with this prophecy that he's talking about, right? He's saying, take your bags with you, take your swords with you, right? This is all about Isaiah 53:12. Isaiah 53:12, which Isaiah 53 is one of the most beautiful passages that predicts how Jesus is going to be. But in verse 12 it says, therefore I will give him a portion among the great, and he will divide the spoils with the strong, because he poured out his life unto death, and was numbered with the transgressors, with the sinners. Some versions say the rebels. For he bore the sin of many and made intercession for the transgressors. This is about the prediction of this prophecy. Jesus is saying, look, we need to look like a bunch of transgressors. We need to play the part. I think that's exactly what he's saying here. He's saying we need to look the part. How do we know he wasn't advocating for arming themselves and using those swords? We know this. Why?
Because Peter, when he cut the ear off, he said,
Yeah, exactly. As soon as one of them uses the swords, he says, hey, no more of that. No, stop. That's not the point, right? And he touches them in the ear and he heals them. In Luke, in Matthew, we hear him say, those who live by the sword die by the sword. Right? He's like, that's not. In fact, later on he says, am I leading rebellion that you come at me with swords and clubs? the point here is Jesus was willing to be counted among the transgressors. Now, counted doesn't mean you are a transgressor, does it? Have you ever been counted with something you didn't want to belong to? I know I have. I've been lumped in with groups I never had any intention of being a part of, right? And didn't want to be a part of. And I think that's what Jesus is saying here. We're going to look the part, guys, but he didn't intend for them to actually use the sword, because that's not what his kingdom is about. In fact, I wonder if it's surprising that he found out that they even had swords, right? Why did they even have them?
Is there one other thing that the reason for the sword then and whatever you need now is that, and I can't remember where, but we can defend ourselves. If somebody comes at us and tries to kill us, we can defend ourselves against them. And we can also, if you see somebody trying to kill somebody else, you can stop that.
Okay,
And what
that's
you
not in this
do-
passage, though. That the argument for self-defense isn't what's happening here, though. Because here's the thing: they came with a whole bunch of people. Were 2 swords going to be enough anyway?
No.
If that's what Jesus meant for them, was to defend themselves, 2 swords weren't going to be enough anyway. So obviously that was not his intention. So that's not in this. All I'm saying is that's not in this passage. The argument for self-defense is not here, because that's not what Jesus is saying. Jesus has no intention of defending himself, right? He wants to be arrested. He wants this to happen. He wants for this all to go the way it does. So you can make that argument elsewhere. You just can't make it here. All right. So again, verse 35. I read the first part. I'm leading a rebellion that you come at me with swords and clubs. That's verse 52. And then Jesus says, every day I was with you in the temple courts, and yet you did not lay a hand on me. But this is your hour when darkness reigns. I think this is one of the most damning things Jesus says to these men. Why? Jesus is going to cooperate throughout this entire trial, this entire mockery of a trial. He's going to cooperate through everything they want to do, right? As a sheep before his shears is silent, so he did not say a word. He went along with it. But he also exposed, with everything he did, the hypocrisy of these men. What did he remind them about? First of all here. What's he reminding them of? These people who come to arrest him.
They had every chance to do it.
Yeah. You've had every chance to arrest me all week. Where have you been? Why are you doing it now? Interesting. I've been out in the public every day. Right there, you could have arrested me at any moment. What's going on? So he reminds him of that, and why does he mention the darkness?
Is that what the chief priest said?
I'm sorry?
Is that what the chief priest said, to get them away from the crowd so that it's in the darkness?
Sure. But why is he mentioned specifically that they're doing it in the dark? When darkness reigns.
I
Roger.
think it's a reference to the condition of their heart.
Yeah. Yeah. What in Scripture, what is darkness always associated with? Almost. Evil, right? Light is good, evil, dark is evil. Right? He's saying it's very fitting that you guys are coming at night to arrest me, because you have darkness in you. You are doing something dark and evil. This is the time when darkness reigns. This is appropriate that you're doing it now. That he's calling them out big time. You could have done it any day. You could have arrested me in the light, and you didn't do it. If you have to wait till dark to do something, it's probably not a good thing to do, right? most of the time, not everything. But most things you have to do in the dark. If you have to wait till the dark, you probably shouldn't do them, right? So that's what he's pointing out here. And it just goes throughout. And that's why I love the parallel gospel that I mentioned at the beginning, is because when you really piece this story together, Jesus is just calling out their hypocrisy. Okay? This is hypocrisy at its worst. At its worst. So they take him, and they put on this mock trial. I'm going to skip over Peter's disowning of Jesus. Verse 63, the men who were guarding Jesus began mocking and beating him. They blindfolded him and demanded, "Prophesy, who hit you?" And they said many other insulting things to him. And then at daybreak, the council of the elders of the people, both the chief priests and the teachers of the law, met together. And Jesus was led before them and said, if you are the Messiah, tell us. And Jesus answered, "If I tell you, you wouldn't believe me, and if I asked, you would not answer. But from now on, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the mighty God." And they all asked, "Are you then the Son of God?" And he replied, "You say that I am," or "It is correct what you say." But the "I am" is very important. And then they said, "Why do we need any more testimony? We've heard it from his own lips." Do you know how many of their own laws they broke throughout this trial? Does anybody know any of them that they broke? Hmm?
The meetings weren't supposed to be done at night, only in the
Yep.
daytime.
You were not supposed to hold trials at night. So the fact that they're doing this trial in the evening and nighttime is wrong to begin with.
That's why it says they waited till the darkness to do certain things.
Well, I mean, yeah.
Why?
Yeah, they're doing it in the dark to do it in secret. It's a secret trial, which is very unlawful, right?
Bearing false witness.
Bearing false witness?
Paid people to lie.
Yeah, we know that from the other Gospels that they paid people to lie. You were not allowed to accuse the person to their face and make them give testimony. What you had to do first was you had to bring witnesses. And at least how many had to agree? Two, right? You had to have at least two people agree in their testimony to make an accusation against someone. But instead, and we know from the other Gospels, they couldn't even get that happen, right? And here they say, Jesus, testify about yourself. Jesus did not have to do that. He could have kept silent, right? Now, again, this is not a real trial. This is kangaroo court, right? They are going to condemn him no matter what. But Jesus did not have to answer that question. It was unlawful for them to even ask it because they had not brought any witnesses. And so they say, "Tell us the truth. If you're the Messiah." Jesus could have said nothing. The fact that he spoke shows that, again, that he's exposing them, that he's in control, and that this is all part of the plan. Okay? And again, in verse 70, when he says, "You say that I am," that "I am" is very important. Whenever you see "I am," right? This is what God told Moses, right? When they ask what my name is, you tell them, "I am sent you." Jesus is making that. So again, if you piece all the stories together from the Gospels, they break just about every law you can break in doing this. And their hypocrisy is incredible because at one point they don't even want to go into Pilate's house because that would make them unclean for the Sabbath, right? And so it's just their thinking is so messed up. But Jesus reveals his identity. And then look at the charges they finally take to Pilate. I know we're running out of time, but the charges they finally take to Pilate are this. Verses 1 and 2 of 23. The whole assembly rose and led him off to Pilate, and they began to accuse him, saying, "We have found this man subverting our nation." What nation are they talking about?
Jewish nation.
No, they're not. I don't think so. They're talking about Rome. This is our nation. Can you believe he's subverting our nation? He opposes paying the taxes of Caesar and claims to be the Messiah, a king. I think the second phrase makes us know what nation they're talking about, right?
Yeah.
He's opposed to paying taxes to Caesar, okay, which Jesus never said, right? In fact, he said, "Give to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God's."
Went fishing to do it.
But all of a sudden these Jews are like, "We're good Roman people. We love Rome," right? The hypocrisy is just outstanding. So they trump up these charges. They accuse Jesus of being an insurrectionist and claiming to be a king. Again, Pilate says, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And he says, "You have said so." In other words, what really is saying there is, yes, it's as you say, right? You're saying correctly. But Pilate says, I don't find anything wrong with this guy. And I think that's very interesting. Here in Luke, we see Pilate, not necessarily, again, a sympathetic figure, but he's not a part of this conspiracy, right? He's trying to get out of it. He sends Jesus to Herod when he finds out he's from Galilee. Herod just wants to get a show out of Jesus. Jesus doesn't give it to him, so he sends him back. But even then, Pilate defends him later on in the chapter and says, I don't find any reason to crucify this man or to kill him. It says, I have found in him no grounds for the death penalty, therefore I will have him punished and then release him. And that's not good enough. They begin to cry. Isn't it interesting that the crowd, this is just kind of a rhetorical question, but how does a crowd who welcomed a man as a king at the beginning of the week now call to crucify him later on in the week, just a few days later? The human condition, right? Hail, King of the Jews, one day, and by the end of the week, crucify him, crucify him. And I don't know if it is exactly the same people, obviously, but it had to have been some of the same people who hailed Jesus as King are now calling to crucify him. This is the human condition. Just notice I'll just point this out as we talk about his death. The words of compassion that Jesus has. It's always struck me how, as he's the one being crucified, as he's the one being led to his death, his thoughts are for everyone else. First, he speaks to the daughters of Jerusalem, saying, "Don't weep for me, right? Weep for those who are going to experience time when I'm not here anymore, right? Because it's not going to get better, and especially we know, Jerusalem's eventually going to fall, the temple's going to be destroyed, so they're going to go through it. Then, of course, the famous, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." I have a hard time forgiving people after a few days of something they've done wrong to me. And Jesus, in the midst of being killed, is calling for forgiveness for those people. It's phenomenal, right? It's something to aspire to. And then, of course, the words he has for the criminal on the cross. "Next to him today, you will be with me in paradise." God can save who he wants to save. The criminal on the cross, as far as we know, didn't do a redeeming thing in his entire life until he hung on a cross next to Jesus, and he defended Jesus, and that was enough for Jesus to say, "You're going to be with me in paradise." It seems unfair, but thank goodness God is unfair. I'm very glad for that. And I mean unfair in the sense that he gives us grace, not in the sense that he's unjust. And then the last thing that you can see at the end of his, after his resurrection, I just want to point this out in chapter 24. What I love about Jesus, the resurrected Jesus, is he does not come back with anything but grace and peace, right? He just wants to assure and reassure his apostles and his disciples. So he encouraged them to touch his wounds, right? He still has the wounds on his body. And he says, "Make sure it's me. Don't touch them." And he even he eats food in front of them. He says, "Make sure, hey, go still eat food," right? And then he reminds them of the prophecy and promised them the Holy Spirit is going to come. He comes back with just this amazing, reassurance, setting them up, giving them that foundation, because he knows, and Luke is going to take us from here into Acts, right, where these men are going to be the ones who begin the church. And so Jesus comes back and reinstates all of them, gets them back where they need to be, so that they can face what's coming after his ascension. And just on that note, on Wednesday nights, we're going to start in Acts. Not this Wednesday, there's one more Wednesday in the quarter, but next week, Wednesday, we're going to start studying in Acts. We're going to go through the first half of Acts in the quarter. That's the second part of Luke, right? Luke Acts. He just takes us right into the origin story of the church and where we go from here. I know we ran through that a lot, but hopefully there's some things for you to take from that and read on your own. And I do recommend that you read those 3 chapters. It's beautiful. I think the passion of Christ, the suffering that he goes through, those chapters, whether you read one gospel one time or another gospel another time, those are something Christians should read on a regular basis. We should be intimately familiar with what Jesus did for us on the cross, and intimately familiar with the suffering that he went through for our sake. So, go with God.